Things we don't have to tell you, mail-in voting is a time-honored tradition in Oregon. But every election, we hear from people who, frankly, failed to mail their ballots on time. Well, procrastinators rejoice, okay? A new law could make your lives easier. Now, your ballot will get counted as long as it's postmarked by Election Day. And the first election in Oregon that'll play out with that new law in place, the Newberg recall. We've been following this race closely here on The Story. Voters have until Election Day, Tuesday, to send in their ballots and decide whether to recall two members of the Newberg-Dundee School Board, Chair Dave Brown and Vice Chair Brian Shannon. They started getting attention last summer when they led an effort to ban Black Lives Matter and LGBTQ pride flags in schools. They then broadened that out to ban all political symbols from classrooms in Newberg. Still, the ban sparked protests. It sparked threats of lawsuits. Kids walked out of school. The superintendent lost his job, and it led to this recall campaign. Now, we've been asking to talk to both men for months, and today, Chair Dave Brown agreed to meet with our producer. So we asked for your questions for this meeting, and Chet sent one. He wrote, "When you talk to the chairman of the Newberg School Board," he wrote, "please ask him why being against racism is political." He said political signs were to be banned, and this specifically includes signs that support being against racism and other kinds of bigotry. So we kind of boiled that down a bit and asked the chair first why he thought the ban was necessary.
It just came out as simple as that: politics in the classroom. And they are political and they are adult driven, and our kids are being used in a situation that can't happen, not in public schools. And we made that decision solely based on politics, because if we keep going down this road, if we lose this recall, then you're going to have to see every flag in every classroom, and that means every flag from both sides of the spectrum, and that's not what kids need. That's not what our schools need.
I think that's the argument that's been made by a lot of people, that the initial ban was specifically for BLM and pride flags. Why those two things specifically?
Those are the ones that were hung up. Those were the first two. And again, NRA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, just a Biden flag, a Trump flag, you name it. If we go down this path, we have to go down this path all the way. And people will do that. You know, there's going to be people on both sides who are going to want their flags in there then. And again, it's not about education or the kids then, it's about what adults want. And so they shouldn't have been allowed in our schools.
So throughout our coverage of this story, we've heard a lot from students and parents from the BIPOC and LGBTQ community who say that the ban hurt them. And they've told us they don't feel safe in Newberg schools, and the displays helped them know which staff members they could turn to. And we have seen disturbing incidents of racism in Newberg schools in the last few months. A student participated in a virtual slave trade, offering up his black classmates to be auctioned, and a staff member showed up to another school in blackface. So we asked Chair Brown if he thinks systemic racism is happening in Newberg.
I'm really disappointed in adults who push this, and I know it has been because I've talked to the parents, I've talked to kids. Do kids experience some of this stuff? Absolutely. It's been around since I was a kid, but again, we have lots of different things that happen to our students every day at school, and going to high school is rough. Middle school is difficult. I think anybody that went through those, if you sit back and just contemplate what you went through at that level, it's a tough time to get through. And I'd like to see adults again take a big step back and stop trying to make all these things the highlight, and just get back to focusing on helping the kids get through the day.
We talked a lot more with Brown about the superintendent being fired and the financial impact of that decision, about accusations that he violated public meetings laws, and how he says religion plays into his role as a school board member. You can watch the entire interview on our KGW YouTube page. Well, still ahead, we don't have to tell you twice just how hot it was in Portland last year, specifically last summer. We all lived through that historic heat wave, so it shouldn't come as much of a surprise that it was pretty hot around the rest of the world as well. And a NASA climate scientist has a lot to say about what this means amid the climate crisis. When the story continues. Welcome back. We want to take some time now and point a spotlight at our climate crisis, the same one fueling more and more extreme natural disasters like the historically severe wildfires we've seen these last few years and this summer's record heat wave that killed close to 100 Oregonians. Now, scientists have stressed to us that you can't judge the status of the climate crisis as a whole by one or two weather events. You need a larger sample size gathered over a longer period of time. So we talked to a climate scientist at NASA about their latest findings out today for the planet as a whole.
What is the big headline of these most recent findings?
The big headline coming out is that NASA, NOAA teamed up and concluded that 2021 was the sixth warmest year on record, basically tied with 2018 in that place. But one of the things that's most significant to scientists like me is that the 8 past years, the 8 most recent years, have been the 8 warmest years on record that goes back over 150 years. So this really dramatic warming that we've seen over the past decade, that continues, and we see more evidence of that in 2021. Really what we've been concerned about for many years and are now seeing play out is that all of that heat that's trapped in the atmosphere by greenhouse gases, that's fuel to many of these extremes. That's fuel to prolonged heat waves. That's fuel to drought, in places like California, Colorado, which can lead to these record-breaking wildfire seasons that we're seeing. And in other parts in the eastern U.S., we're actually seeing, more intense rainfall, more intense storms. So this is really some of the reasons that, we're so concerned about the impacts of climate change in our local communities. And you're totally right that these, these very, very intense heat waves that you guys experienced and suffered through are incredibly damaging because we see many people, they're not prepared for this kind of heat. The houses aren't built for this kind of heat. The infrastructure is not built for this kind of heat. So when you start to throw that into places that aren't expecting it, you see these dramatic and unfortunately deadly effects.
Yeah, effects that we've seen here in Oregon, as she said, in person. And that point driven home, our team decided to ask an admittedly kind of cliche TV interview question, but frankly, it was one that we felt like was warranted.
Is this just a dire headline and a dire message being delivered? Is there, not to be, Pollyanna about it, but is there any reason from your end to be hopeful or to think that this is still something that can be turned around, especially realistically, like given the conversations that we are having as a society?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think this is what people are asking a lot. And I would say I don't consider this dire, but I consider it serious and urgent. So I hope people, there is a real thing about stress and anxiety. I don't want people to feel stressed. I don't want people to feel anxious, but I hope they feel motivated to take action and to do so quickly. I think there are some reasons for optimism. Look, we know what the problem is. We know the problem from this is that this warming is caused by greenhouse gas. That's caused by emissions from human activity. So even though it's difficult, we know what the problem is and we know how to address it. And we're seeing examples all across our community at local scales. Cities in some cases are being very proactive at reducing emissions. I know there's places in Oregon where you guys are being proactive in banding together to reduce emissions. So there is some hope, but there's also reasons to understand what's going on and be concerned.
All right. Keep sending in your questions and your comments to the story at kgw.com. We're going to finish the show next.